Most people chase money first, then wonder why they hate the work.
You get to a certain point in life that you realize that you're better off chasing a dream. It may not make you millions, but it's going to make you happier than just doing a job.
That mindset doesn't just affect your life. It shows up directly in how you create.
More often than not, in storytelling, less is more. You're more powerful when you do less.
But even when you understand that, the process still isn't clear or easy.
It's just like a walk away from it, get away from it for a while. Sometimes for me, I have to find a different way of looking at it.
So how do you build work that actually matters and stay creative for long enough to keep doing it?
Vegas Voices podcast.
We're on studio today. Today's guest is someone who quietly shaped stories behind the scenes and then turned around to help others tell theirs. Ken Cioe is a filmmaker, animation veteran, VFX producer, educator, and the director of operations for the Damn Short Film Festival, one of the most respected short film festivals in the Southwest. From working on animated features like Anastasia and Titan AA, that's impressive, to producing major television and film projects to helping independent filmmakers find their voice. Ken's career is about storytelling, adaptability, and building creative ecosystems that last. Welcome, sir. I never thought I would have a person on film here, and I didn't know that Vegas had film stuff. So welcome to the podcast.
Yeah,
Ken.
well, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So you grew up in Cranston, Rhode Island, a New Englander by heart. What kind of kid were you creatively, like when you were a kid?
I was a really shy kid growing up.
Okay.
So I think to cope with that, I was always coming up with stories. Always telling stories. I was always fantasizing. I was always getting in trouble for daydreaming.
Okay.
When I was in school.
Were you using those, what were they, Super 8 cameras back in the day? And
not when I was a
stuff?
kid, but when I went to film school, I did. Yeah,
Okay.
I did a couple of little projects in Super 8 and a couple in 16 millimeter, black and white stuff. That's how I cut my teeth.
Okay.
You know.
Okay. So when did storytelling first grab you? Was it movies, animation, writing?
I don't know. I've always had a vivid imagination. I've always been someone that can look at something and just come up with a story just by looking at it.
Okay.
I always had imaginary friends. Whether it was a different coloration on the wall panel or something like that looked like something to me, and all of a sudden that turned into a story. And then, I think from there it developed into a love for, television and movies and stuff like that. So I never thought it was something I would chase when I was a kid, but then when I got older, I realized it was just who I was. So
is there any secret to storytelling? Is there anything, does it come natural, or is there a structure, or how does this come about?
Yeah, I think there's, so I've been teaching screenwriting, for over 20 years now. And I learned when I went to film school, and then from teaching it and then getting my MFA in screenwriting, that I think initially it starts with just some kind of idea. You see something, you think that was cool, you have an emotion or something like that. But there is a structure to developing a story, or at least a good story.
So for those of us that don't know what MFA is, could you explain it?
Oh, that's my Master of Fine Arts. It's a master's degree. Yeah.
So that's what you get when you go to get film school? Is it a Master of Fine Arts?
Well, you can get an MA, or like an MFA is kind of like it's the terminal degree. So it's like the highest level you can get in that field.
Cool.
At least it was at the time anyway.
All right. You went to Emerson College, right?
That's where I got my undergrad, yep.
Okay. So ultimately studying film and screenwriting, how did it get so serious?
Well, when I was in high school, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I thought I wanted to be an architect until I actually went to school for it, and it was not fun for me.
Okay.
So I just, kicking around for a while in college, not going anywhere, and I started to, try to figure out what I wanted to do, it took a little bit of time off. And it was something that was always in the back of my head. I liked creative writing. I'd taken creative writing classes. I'd always had an interest in film and storytelling. So I started to look into it. And then the more I did, the more eventually it just kind of, on its own, just pulled me in that direction. And Emerson was not my first choice at the time, but it just really became the way to go for me. And I'm so glad that I did. It was one of the better choices. I kind of grew up, found myself, found what I wanted to do. And then that led me into, feature animation, which then led me into other opportunities that I've had.
So is Emerson, I really don't know about the field. So is it a very fine school? Is it like the place to go?
Yeah, it's one of the top schools for things like film and television and acting and stuff like that. Some really big names have come out of Emerson College.
So was there any moment where you thought like going into filmmaking this is risky, maybe too risky? Yeah,
when I first thought about it, I thought my parents wouldn't support it. I thought I'd get the, what are you going to do? How are you going to have a job type thing? But they were actually really supportive of it. And the more I got into it at college and stuff like that, the more I realized, the different opportunities and things like that. And I got, you get to a certain point in life that you realize that you're better off chasing a dream. It may not make you millions, but it's going to make you happier than just doing a job.
So are you happy right now?
Yeah, I mean, the film festival makes me really happy. But if I look back at my career, the jobs that I've had that have come out of me going to film school, I have been incredibly happy during those times. Absolutely, yeah.
Right. And like when you're there and you don't know what the future holds, but you're in it, how does that feel? How does that, you're just job to job and, figuring things out?
Like when I'm actually doing the things that I want to do?
No, like back in the past, like we're like getting your origin more or less, right? So like you don't know where you're going. Are you just focusing on the next project, on the next thing that passions you?
Oh, for me, I just kind of get into the moment of where I'm at, So like, if I go way back to my beginning and, I'm working in the studio, working on Anastasia, that was my focus, right?
No way.
That was, I didn't think about what was coming next or tomorrow or anything like that. And I'm still that way. If I'm working on a project, that's my focus. Like right now, the only thing I'm focused on is the 2026 Damn Show Film Festival.
Okay,
so,
we'll get into it.
No, sure. I wasn't saying it for that reason. I'm just saying like that's my focus right now. But that's usually what happens even, when I'm working for a company, if whatever project I'm on, that's the focus.
Okay. So you broke in as a PA at Fox Animation. Mm-hmm. What did those early days look like?
It was strange. It was my first job is in this big studio, and it was interesting too because this was back in the 90s, and it was just after The Lion King had come out. So everybody wanted to jump into feature animation, right? Because Disney had really revolutionized and got the feature animation kickstarted again with, Little Mermaid and Aladdin, and Lion King was the fourth. And so Fox wanted to get in, and they partnered with Don Bluth and Gary Goldman, who had a studio in Ireland, and that studio was going under or something, and they partnered and brought him over, and they started the animation studio in Phoenix. So when I first started there, it was 90% of the studio was from Ireland, so
was there a lot of computer stuff going on at the time?
It was just starting.
It just you guys were just still drawing, or were you like making the story or the shots? How did that look?
Yeah, most of it was still at the time traditional, and that's what Anastasia was traditional, but it was one of the first feature animations that combined the two. There was a lot of CG animation in that movie. But like when I got in, I worked in the digital paint department. And before that, they used to hand paint all the cells in traditional animation. But when I got into the industry, it was everything was being done digitally. After it was all hand drawn, they'd scan it into the computer, come to my department, and then we would just add the color in digitally. So it was a mixture of things, and then by the time I was getting out of it, 3D animation was really kind of the way to go and taking off the industry.
That was like Pixar and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
So how did a normal day look like in that environment for you?
As a PA or when I was in the paint department?
Yeah, both.
Both. As a PA, it was interesting. It was all little odd jobs, you know, and it was like,
So it's production assistant, right?
yeah, production assistant.
It's like how you get your foot in.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like a glorified gopher, excuse me. I was like, whether they needed someone to deliver the mail, go on an airport run, you know, grab somebody food, answer phones, anything, you know. And I did whatever. My dad had a great work ethic and instilled that in us, me and my brothers. But then when I was in film school, that's what we got taught. It was like, you know, you work your way up. You know, you had to learn, right? And the best way to get in is just, you know, hey, if somebody needs something done, volunteer for it. So that's what I did, and actually saved my job along the way. And you know, I was just incredibly excited to be part of it. So when they said, hey, I need someone to do this, my hand went up, you know, and then I got recognized that way, and they wanted, you know, it was like, oh, Ken's reliable, so we're gonna keep going to Ken. And you know, before I knew it, I got a full-time job there, and then I got promoted, and you know, so.
So you broke into the paint department, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So how did that look like when you were doing that every day?
Well, it was at first it was a little like, well, we had a test for it, right? They had tests that you had to take to see, you know, if you could handle it. And I apparently did pretty well on the test and interviewed pretty well. But the day I used to tell my students this, the day I actually found out that I got that job, they had let go some PAs about 2 or 3 weeks earlier. And I was in the middle of the courtyard one day, and the head of HR happens to bump into me and says, hey, when you get a chance, why don't you come by my office? And I'm just a, you know, 20-something-year-old kid, and I was like scared. I'm like, oh, man, I'm going to get let go today, right? Because they had a lot of PAs, right? So I kind of reluctantly went by thinking I was going to get fired. And instead, he handed me a piece of paper and offered me the job in digital ink and paint. And I was, well, you know, I went from making like, you know, $200 a week, whatever the heck they paid me, to a decent salary. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun learning the process, you know, because I never thought I'd work in animation. But then when I worked there and I learned that, you know, being part of a feature film, it's more than just learning how to, you know, hang a drawer or, you know, or anything like that. And I just fell in love with animation and the process. And, you know, the storytelling is storytelling, but there's a difference to telling a story in animation versus, you know, a live action narrative versus a documentary versus a TV show, so forth and so on.
I just can't imagine, because when you see a movie, you see all these credits and thousands of people, and you just like glaze through it or don't even see it. But for that 2-hour piece of content, it's just how much work and different departments and things go into it, man.
Yeah, for traditional animation, it used to take about 20 months, I think, on average, from start to finish.
Wow.
And, you know, we had like 250, 300 artists in the studio on staff.
Crazy.
And plus, then there was we outsourced a lot of the work as well. So, you know, there were hundreds of people that worked on, and there still is on any film, right? Same was, you know, after that I worked in visual effects, and it's the same thing. You know, any film where you have visual effects involved, you're gonna have a lot of artists.
So you worked on, let's go deep on Anastasia and Titan AE, which I think probably were very career-defining moments. Tell us a little bit of the story behind that.
Well, I stumbled across it. I just happened to move to Phoenix.
Okay.
I didn't know they were there, and I got lucky to get in. And
you got into Anastasia first or Titan?
Anastasia was the first
Okay.
one. Yeah, that was the first feature, and they'd already had that, you know, planned before I even started there. And it was, you know, it was an incredible experience for me. You know, I remember if you ever seen Anastasia, the ballroom scene where all the paintings come to life. That was like the first sequence that we got to see storyboarded out. And, you know, I had never had any experience with an animatic or, you know, seeing professional storyboards and, you know, and edited together to kind of start to illustrate how the story was going to be told. So it was pretty cool. And the studio that we were in, you know, the building existed, but they rebuilt it to be a studio. So there was a theater inside. So we would get screenings every week of part of the film. You know, so every Thursday we'd go in, and there was like a 45, 50 seat theater or something like that. and we got to see it up on the screen. So by the time Anastasia was done, I had watched the movie through about 1 million times. So it was, but it was still pretty cool when it was all done and we went to the premiere and to see it for the first time, like in its completed. But it was the first time I'd ever gone to a theater and watched a film where everybody in the theater was there to see the credits and not the film. But it was a pretty cool experience. I got my girlfriend at the time who worked there as well, and I took 2 of my brothers as our guests. So it was pretty cool to go and see my name in the credits for the first time with a couple of my brothers. And then as a bonus, we had gotten a month vacation. So I flew back. I took my month when it was released, and I flew back home. And I got to go to to a theater and watch it with my parents and my grandmother and my other nieces and nephews and stuff like that. So it was a pretty cool experience because it was something I dreamed about my whole life, to see my name up in the credits.
Wow.
So the first time that happens to you, it's pretty cool.
Good. Tell us about Titan AE. Tell me the story behind that.
So yeah, that was interesting because that started out as a different project. They had hired a completely other team. And that team wanted to do it as a 3D piece. But at the time, 3D animation was not what it is now. And they had wasted a lot of money in pre-production. So they shelved it. And then in Phoenix, we had just finished doing a straight-to-video called Bartok the Magnificent. And we didn't have anything, didn't have anything planned. So they're like, well, here, we got this project. So, the directors and producers were like, okay, let's do this. It was a different, experience working on that. It was, more sci-fi fantasy type thing, which is something I love. I mean,
dude,
that's
it's super cool. I love that movie.
Yeah. So it was interesting. But it's really weird because once you get your, your feet wet in the industry, you start to become a little cynical and stuff like that. And,
what do you mean? Why it's
well,
cynical?
it's like when you're working on stuff, sometimes it's like you're seeing it over and over, and sometimes you're like, this isn't as good, or I'm not necessarily as proud of it. But then when it's all done, you change. It's like years later, I look back and it's like, it was a cool experience. My biggest problem, I think, wasn't the actual movie or what we did on it. Was that it was just that the studio didn't promote it as well, and it didn't, it didn't do great box office wise.
Okay.
But I think that was more just because it wasn't promoted well. Unfortunately, the industry is a business, right? And it's all about money, and if they don't see it being worth it, they're not going to, invest it or something like, So it was unfortunate because I think it was better than how well it was received, in the box office. And it was interesting too to work. And I didn't get to work with any of the celebrities that did the voices, but I was really close friends with the guy who ran the editing department, and he was the one who actually went and did all the recordings. So hearing his stories about working with Matt Damon and Drew Barrymore and stuff like that was pretty cool.
So I'm curious, you as a filmmaker and looking at all these details and the animation and the paint, do you see movies differently than other people? Like even like in a time, probably I think your brain is in a time distortion where you can see like frame by frame by frame by frame and, point out little things that maybe to the common human are just invisible.
Yeah, especially with animation, because after working in it, and then I taught it for 10 years, so my eye developed, so I can look at it and, I can notice certain things about it. So sometimes going to an animated film with me is a different experience because I'm experiencing and enjoying the story because that's my love, but I'm also looking at the animation and being impressed by it, So when my kids were young and my ex-wife and I would take him to the movie, she'd always get frustrated because I was always commenting on how the animation in the film. But yeah, I noticed certain things. And even in the credits, I like to watch the credits because, I look for people I used to work with and stuff like that, which is cool. But some people, I don't think they like when they're watching a film to know how it's made. But to me, that's just as enjoyable as the actual story itself.
Well, that's very cool. So let's change gears a little bit. After feature animation, you moved to Vegas and spent 10 years teaching animation on film.
Yeah.
Why did you start teaching?
Well, unfortunately, the studio closed. And, I bounced around a little bit, went to LA for a little bit. Then I moved back to Phoenix to try to help someone start his own studio. That didn't take off. Moved back to Rhode Island for a little while. And, I had the urge to be back doing something creative. And a really close friend of mine that we started out as PAs together in Phoenix, he got a job here in Vegas teaching animation and thought I'd be perfect at it. So he reached out to me, and I was like, yeah, I want to move back west and get out of the cold. And, teaching animation and film is, I thought a nice challenge at the time. So I moved out here, and it didn't take long for me to fall in love with that. So as much as I love story, I like teaching as well. I find a lot of joy in that.
Okay, so what do students give you that the industry doesn't?
There's like when you work on something, and in the end, there's this finished product, and you can look at that and say, I was part of making that. There's this high, this excitement from that. It's the same thing as with teaching, is that there was this young person who wanted to do something, and I was able to be part of helping them to grow and fine tune, enhance their skills and get better at it and learn more, or even get excited about learning more. Because when you work in a creative field, you're always learning. It never stops. So.
And then you pivoted from there to GM, right?
For Phoenix. I didn't work for GM, but I worked for a company that GM was their main client. We did online car configurators.
Okay, and that was in Michigan? You moved out to Michigan? Man, you've done a lot of travel.
Yeah.
So what made you say yes to that type of thing?
Well, for being honest, unfortunately, the school that I was at, all the really good leadership had left and was replaced by people who cared more about money and less about education. I didn't really want to be part of that because I felt, at the college level, if you're not allowed to actually teach them, then you're stealing from them. And I didn't want to be part of that. And a friend of mine, again, somebody that I'd worked with in animation, was working in Michigan and had reached out to me because he needed some producers, and he thought I'd be good at it. So I wasn't sure I wanted to do it, but I went out to visit in July, and it's beautiful in Detroit in July, not so much in November and December and January.
Super cool.
But I was like, yeah, I'll come in. The money was good and it was something different. Things in my life had been changing, so I needed a fresh start at the time. So I figured I'd try it out.
Wow. And what was it like? Was it the VR, AR, what?
Yeah, we did all kinds of stuff. It started out with just, like I said, doing there was a studio of artists. So I'm working with the same types of individuals. And we built all the 3D assets for the online configurators. We also did a lot of marketing images and stuff like that. It was all done digitally, General Motors, or I worked on Chevy vehicles at the time, and if they were doing a promo ad, they would go out and hire a photographer and shoot a location. Then those shots would come to us. Our retouching team would make the shot look perfect, take things out, make the grass green, add things in or whatever, and then we would add the vehicle in there digitally. So we did things like that. We also did AR and VR experiences for various different companies and things like that. So I was a project manager there for a while, and then I moved in and was helped running the studio for a little bit there, and then I took over. They didn't have a pricing department there, and it was a little chaotic. And I said, "This is ridiculous." So I went to the director of finance, and I said, let me help you out here and build a pricing department. And so I did that for a little bit. And then I wasn't a big fan of being there, and I wasn't a big fan of the company, and I really wanted to move back here. So after 6 years, I said, all right, enough.
Well, there's no storytelling, right? In that, it's just creating models and stuff.
Yeah, I did a little bit, on the side, but it just, no offense, I got a lot of good friends in Michigan, but it wasn't a good fit for me. And, I like Southern Nevada, so I wanted to come back.
We're just going through your resume, man. This is crazy because it's just fascinating. Next is Albuquerque.
Yeah.
And VFX production. You worked on shows like Cleaning Lady, Dark Winds, and films like The Hunger Games. Man, you got the pedigree. What's different about storytelling at that scale compared to animation and independent film?
Yeah, there's a lot I learned working in the visual effects industry. especially like working on a television show, right? Because
Okay.
we're post-production and visual effects, but we're involved through the whole process, right? So I had to be there through all the production meetings when, for all the episodes. I would get the scripts ahead of time because we had to break the scripts down to bid out potential visual effects throughout the show. And that was a process of like, I could have done anywhere like a dozen different versions through an episode because the script was changing a lot. And then, budgetary reasons and whether or not the post producer wanted to pay for something, so forth and so on. But and it's an interesting process because there's a formula to doing it, and they're on top of it and they know what they're doing, right? So as somebody who didn't have a lot of experience in production, that live action, it was an incredible learning experience, and the company I worked for was amazing, and the artists, just they blew me away, the talent that I'd worked with, and that's always been the thing that I've loved the most in all of the jobs that I've had, is working with some incredibly talented individuals, and they're all really, for the most part, really great people as well. They're a lot of fun, So, and it was a great job too. I worked from home, so everything was virtual, all our meetings and things like that. I had to live in Albuquerque because of the tax breaks purposes and all that stuff. So that was interesting, because I went from Vegas, in the Vegas area, which is, there's always something open all, 24 hours.
Albuquerque's so boring.
Yeah, everything shuts down in Albuquerque at 9 o'clock. So it's like I'm 10 o'clock and I'm hungry. Oh, well, so a little bit different, but it is beautiful and I enjoyed my time there. Unfortunately, the Hollywood strikes kind of ended that, opportunity for me. And then I moved back to Vegas, been kicking around here for the last couple of years, but yeah, I enjoyed working on it. I learned a lot, from, like I said, the different TV shows and different feature films that I had the opportunity to work on there.
That's awesome. So what skill from your earliest career ended up being the most valuable in VFX?
What skill?
Yes.
I think what I learned early on, I had some really good leaders that I learned under, was how to connect with people, how to get along with people. Because when you're working on, whether it was my time in, working in feature animation or working in the studio I worked in Michigan or working in visual effects, you're working on a team that has a lot of different people involved and a lot of different personalities, and you got to get things done. And dealing with people in general, but especially creative people, it doesn't work just to like demand or, I used to tell people all the time when I worked in Michigan and I needed something in the studio from an artist, I wouldn't send them a message. First of all, it was like 10 steps away, right? I would walk over. Face to face, I think, works a lot better. And I never started off the conversation with the project. I started off the conversation with whatever I had in common with that individual, right? So when I was coming over, it wasn't an eye roll. It was a smile and an excited, hey, Ken, right? And we would have a conversation first before I would get into, hey, how's it going? Am I going to have this on time and stuff like that? And I carried that. I learned that, I think, in my early years in animation. And then I carried that through my time in Michigan, through teaching, and then eventually into visual effects. So it was a lot easier to jump on a call and, talk to somebody, and because, when I was in Michigan, I had a couple of artists that were a little bit, high strung, and they get really frustrated. And the only thing they ever wanted was just to be able to vent. So I'd stand there and let them vent. And then at the end of it, I never had to say anything. They'd vent and then it'd be like, all right, for you, Ken, I'll get it done, right? And it was just because I showed them the respect that they were looking for. That's all most people are looking for. So it's all in how you communicate.
I totally get that. I'm going to take that to my business because I'm like to the point. I don't let people vent. It's like, get it done.
Yeah. Well, there's a balance because, and I'm learning that right now in the festival because I have a team and that a lot of them are in new positions. And so they don't have necessarily a sense of urgency or understanding sometimes the time, in scheduling.
Time is money in the movie business, like you said, right?
Yeah. So sometimes it's like, you don't want to just be bossing people around, but at the same time, it's like, how do you get people to understand it's got to get done right now?
Right, because they're special. It's a creative type of brain. Yeah. It's not like your typical A-type brain.
Absolutely, yeah.
Totally get it. So let's go into the film festival now.
Okay.
So how is it DAM or DAM? What's
Yep. Yeah, because it's in Boulder City, which.
But is it what? It's the dam, like dam.
Yeah, the dam,
Okay.
like the Hoover Dam.
Got it. So, and that's been on since 2005, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So, what made you say yes in the beginning?
Well, the film festival was founded by Lee Lanier and his wife Anita.
Okay.
And I was teaching with Lee. Lee and I were the full-time animation instructors. Lee had a background in animation. He worked on some 3D feature films, and he also did a lot of short films. And he did the film festival circuit for years. And then him and Anita wanted to move. I think they were in the Bay Area, and they wanted to move, and they were looking for a place that they potentially could start a film festival. They came across Boulder City. And Anita was the one who named the film festival because Boulder City was actually created to house the workers that built the dam.
That's correct.
And it's all about the Hoover Dam. So that's where the name came from. And so I was working with Lee, and I didn't know much about it, but I just came down the very first year just to support him. And I fell in love with it, and then helped him out a couple times, over the first few years. And then he asked me to join the board after the third year, and I've been more heavily involved since then.
So then you operated in the board and stepped away for a while, and then now you're director of operations.
Yep.
So what did that distance give you perspective on?
When I left the first time?
Yeah.
Well, I think when you go anywhere and you do anything, whether it's successful or you fail at it, you're learning something, right? So, I had stepped away and I was in Michigan, and even though I wasn't really enjoying my time there, I was still learning things, right? And when I came back here and rejoined the board, one of the things that I made sure to do differently when I first came back was to speak up more and to be like, hey, why don't we do something a lot more like this, and try to understand more behind the scenes and, of how the festival's put together. And, we started doing a few things different that made things more efficient, right? I became someone who can see and take a situation and make it more efficient through my time and things that I dealt with when I was in my job in Michigan. So I try to apply those, to the festival. And my first festival back was 2020. And we were able to get the festival in just before the pandemic hit. And it was a hugely successful year. We were so excited because we had tried a bunch of new things. And right away, as soon as the festival was over, we were already planning on the changes we wanted to do for 21. Unfortunately, the pandemic hit, and in order to survive, we had to go virtual for a couple of years.
Okay.
And that kind of set us back a little bit. And then when we came back, we had to change venues, and things were a little different. So now we're trying to grow back to that point. But we're trying to apply the same type of thing. I'm thinking how do I make this process more efficient so it's easier for the team and we can grow, at a faster rate.
That's very cool. Tell me more about the festival. What type of movies do you showcase? What type of filmmakers? When it runs? How long does it run? All that stuff. I want to.
All right. Well, the festival's every February.
Okay.
We usually aim for the weekend after the Super Bowl. It's now it's 6 days. So this year will be the 11th through the 16th.
Okay.
Wednesday through Monday. We show all short films. In case somebody doesn't know, a short film is defined by anything between 1 and 40 minutes.
Well, I did not know.
Yeah. Typically, most of our short films run between 5 and 18 minutes. We will get longer ones. Documentaries tend to be longer. We do actually have a film this year. It's 39 minutes long.
Okay.
We don't usually. Usually films that are that long
far.
aren't that good, but you do have those films, those rare films that are. We have every type of genre you can think of. Comedy, animation, documentary, science fiction, horror, drama. We have an international drama category. We even have a special category for Nevada filmmakers. So Nevada filmmakers get a discounted rate, and they could submit as a Nevada filmmaker. And we have a couple of blocks that are just Nevada-made films. What was that? Our programs range from anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes long. And you'll get anywhere from 3 to 15 films, depending on the length of the films. And what we look for is it's, quality and, something that's, going to live up to the standard that Lee and Anita had started all those years ago. And, we'll get filmmakers from all over the world. This year we have 21 countries represented in the festival.
No way. Here in Boulder City.
Yes.
Our sister city.
Yeah.
That's amazing, man. So you've spoken about filmmaking as a tool for social impact. When did that become important to you?
That's a good question. I don't know when it became important. It is. I think it just was a slow thing over the years, and I think it probably started when I was at Emerson, and getting introduced to films that, I'd never seen before, as a kid growing up, and, how they were made, why they were made, how they've impacted, people. Storytelling is really interesting and it's a passion of mine, but it can be very dangerous, right? Because
how so?
Well, you see a lot of stuff nowadays, right? Everybody's telling a story, and the spoken word, the written word can be very dangerous, right? Especially if it's done maliciously or to try to get somebody to believe something that isn't true, or to influence them for the wrong reasons, because storytelling exists in everything. It's not just movies and TV shows, commercials and ads. It's all storytelling, And I've had different jobs where we've had to work on, commercials or, more marketing stuff, and it's all about telling a story, So I think for me, understanding storytelling has always helped me understand when a story's being told, if there's an agenda behind it, or if there's like, okay, I can appreciate that even though I'm not going to fall for it. Whereas I don't know if everybody, thinks like that. And, sometimes people fall for things. I mean, you just think about when you're growing up, the number of stories you heard that you believed, and then at some point in your life, you find out it's not true, So that's the way it can be dangerous, So I do think there's a responsibility along with it. Wow. But, I believe I don't believe in censorship. I do believe in ratings, because I do believe that there are things that are appropriate for a developed mind versus an undeveloped mind. But I don't believe that there's any such thing as a story that shouldn't be told. Especially if it's just for entertainment purposes or giving people knowledge that they may not have had before.
So in that vein, what responsibility, if any, do filmmakers have beyond storytelling and entertainment?
I think if you ask different people, you're going to get different answers.
Well, I want yours.
I think for me, I think you need to think about the impact of what your story's going to do. Now, don't get me wrong, right? If you take songs, right, music, right, that's also storytelling. A lot of times, I grew up in the '80s. And there's a lot of musicians back in the 80s and 90s that got accused of their music being telling something or trying to influence, and it really wasn't, right? It was more about making things they're aware of. And just because the topic is a difficult topic or one we don't want to recognize doesn't mean it's something that shouldn't be told or it's going to make people do bad things. But I think, what is your intention? I think that's always something that you should ask yourself when you're telling a story or you're going to create something that the public's going to see.
So it's like choose the dark side or choose the light side kind of a thing, right?
I guess, dark stories are fine. I love a lot of them. A lot of my stories are dark. But, my intention for me, whenever I tell a story, isn't to convince somebody to do bad or to try to convince somebody of something that's not true. It's just to tell a story and hopefully make people aware of things, right? Sometimes movies are really hard to watch, right, because of the content. But the intention isn't to upset you, anger you, or to make you think that the bad guy was good or anything like that. It's to make you aware that these bad things go on, and maybe when we're aware, we can do things. And I don't think every story has to have an agenda or anything like that. Sometimes they're just brain dead, right? Sometimes it's just, I don't want to think, so just make me laugh for, a couple hours.
Cool. Out of the festival, what's a short film that stayed with you long time after the lights went out?
Oh, there's a lot of them. I don't know if I have one in particular. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times if it has it has to invoke some kind of emotion in me. You know, did it make me laugh out loud? You know, did it make me think about something? You know, a lot of times I tell people, the documentaries a lot of times always surprise me because they're always about topics that I am not ever aware of. You know, I'm not going to go into it for particular reasons, but we had one that we actually had to pull because there was legal issues going on with it, which was unfortunate because the topic was really powerful, right? And it was a really nice and uplifting story. But sometimes they're not always like that, you know. And even some of the narratives, I've had some films in our festival that really have pushed you to think like, you know, holy crap, you know, like that's going on somewhere in life, you know.
Wow. So what's the biggest myth young filmmakers believe about making it?
Biggest myth?
Yes.
I'm just going to say that the biggest myth is that every single shot you take needs to be in your film. It does not. Your film is going to be long and boring if you do that, right? I do really believe in what was preached to me in film school. Somebody else should edit your film, right? You shouldn't edit, right? Most short filmmakers, most independent filmmakers edit their own work, you know, but a lot of times, you know, you are out there all day long with your crew shooting a shot and it takes a long time and there's a lot that goes into it and then you don't want to cut it out.
So it's like you're too much in the weeds, right?
Yeah. So I think, you know, what I learned going to school and learning how to write scripts and stuff, that more often than not in storytelling, less is more. You're more powerful when you do less, you know, because otherwise you're treating the audience a lot of times like they're stupid, like you have to tell them everything and rely on your dialogue and your actor and you know, because that's life, you know. And when your story's more like life, it's going to be more believable. It's going to be more enjoyed.
Okay. So if someone feels stuck creatively, what's the first lever they should pull?
For me, it's just like a walk away from it, get away from it for a while, you know, because sometimes for me, I have to find a different way of looking at it. You know, there's a great scene in one of my favorite movies, Dead Poet Society, where he makes them all stand up on the desk. You know, the whole point is you have to look at life sometimes from a different angle. You know, and sometimes that's hard. It's hard to even find a different angle. And that's a lot of times where asking somebody else, you know, or how does somebody else do it? Or, you know, just getting a different opinion. I always tell my students, you should ask people to read your stuff and ask them for feedback and never get personally bothered by what their feedback is. Because I always tell them, like, I remember when I had people read my script for the first time and ask me, can I give you notes? And I'm like, absolutely. And then as I'm reading their notes, my thought was like, what the hell are they saying? That's not even the story, right? But then what I realized was it wasn't because they were stupid. It was because I didn't write it right. I didn't create a scene so that they could understand what I was trying to get them to understand. So now I have to go back and figure out a different way of doing that. But a lot of times by getting those notes, even if they're not usable or even if they seem stupid, it helps me think about it. And then a lot of times that kickstarts something in my brain of like, oh, what if I try it like this? And sometimes you just have to go and try a bunch of different things and not be afraid of that. 9 of them aren't going to work, but then eventually one will. Or maybe it doesn't work, but it gets you going in the right direction.
That gives me a lot of perspective into a filmmaker's mind. That's great. So let's go into a rapid fire round of questions here. So what do you prefer, animation or live action?
Animation.
Okay. Teaching or producing? Oof.
Teaching is safer, but I think producing is a little bit more, I like the outcome a little bit more. You know what I'm saying? It's a little bit, I'm going to go with producing just by a hair though.
Okay. East Coast or Southwest?
I should have known that was coming. East Coast.
Okay. Short films or features?
Short films.
One word that defines a great story.
Precise.
All right. Looking back, what part of your career are you most proud of? Not because it was successful, but because it mattered.
Individually, my most, I think, for me was at the end of Anastasia and
Ooh.
seeing my name up there for the first time. That's second. Sorry, I know you want to answer, but I think the first time ever I helped a student realize what they wanted to be and get it to click in their head was probably my most defining moment in life.
How did that student make out? Are they making huge movies now? Or?
No, I think it was, it helped them make it through. They were struggling early on, and it just helped them make it through all the way to the end. I don't know what they went on to do after that, but it was, you could see the light bulb go on of like how they needed to approach being a student, versus whatever it was before they got there.
Love it. Love it. So when filmmakers talk about the Damn Face Festival 20 years from now, what do you want or hope that they say that you help protect?
That I help protect from the,
Yeah.
that we have from the very beginning to whenever it ends, that it has always been about the filmmaker, and that they've always felt appreciated when they're there.
Wow. So what's the next story you're personally excited to help bring into the world?
Again, this will sound silly, but the 2026 Damn Cioe Film Festival, like I said, is what I'm focusing on right now, and that telling that story or getting that story told. And then we'll see from there. I will admit, though, I'm getting the bug to write and create again. So I think once I'm out of this festival season, I'm going to sit down and do some serious thinking about getting myself motivated again to write, because it's been a little bit. And
any ideas brewing?
Yeah. I started working on a pilot episode about 1.5 years ago. And I got some ideas of what I want to do with that. So I'm probably going to pick that back up again.
So to the format of like, how TV is now?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like, something like a streaming service or something like that.
Cool. What can you share a little bit about it?
Just it's a sci-fi, based post-apocalyptic type story.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Ken, it was a pleasure having you in the show. How can people find out more about you and your festival?
You can go to our website, which is DAM, D-A-M, shortfilm.org.
Okay, that's
the
easy.
schedule's up there, and you can pretty much get any information that you want from there. Yeah.
Very good. And who would have thought we would have an amazing filmmaker here today? Thank you. Thank you for being a Vegas voice.
This was great.
Appreciate you.